Section 1. Find leverage points. Chapter 1. Go and see the work. You can find leverage points by observing up close the reality of your work. Go and see the work. 1. In 2016, Karen Ritter, an assistant principal at East Leiden High School, near Chicago, wanted to understand how the school could better serve its students. So she chose to do something unorthodox. As part of a program called Shadow, a student challenge, created by the Stanford D. School and the design firm IDEO, she followed around a 9th grader, Alan, for an entire school day. Her day with Alan started in PE. She gamely ran sprints in the gym while students gawked and grinned. Afterward, the academic school day began. She sat next to him in class, completed assignments, just like he did, ate cafeteria food. Lunch was difficult, she said diplomatically. Ritter's experience was covered by PBS for a news segment, and watching the video of Ritter's day is a bit like watching a balloon deflate in slow motion. At one point, the journalist asks her how she's doing. "I'm holding up," she says, with a strained smile. Body language: "I am not holding up." Particularly draining was Alan's algebra class. Because of his low test scores in math, he'd been slotted into a double-length remedial period. The camera caught Ritter sneaking looks at the clock, just like a real student. After a long stretch of instruction, the bell rang, but to Ritter's chagrin, it wasn't for her. There were 30 more minutes to go. It was brutal to sit through that, she said. The day before her observation, Ritter was asked to complete a report card, grading the school on a variety of factors. For supportive environment, she gave the school an A. Then, after her day of shadowing, she was asked to revisit those marks. The grade for supportive environment stayed an A. She was pleased with what she experienced. But on other factors, the grades deteriorated. Before the day, she'd scored the school a B on this statement: "In this school, students learn actively, creating, questioning, discovering." After her day as a student, the B cratered to a C-. Similarly, with the grinding double-length algebra class fresh in her mind, her score for student engagement dropped from a B to a C+. By shadowing a student, Ritter discovered that some of her intuitions had been exactly right. The school really did provide a supportive environment. In other places, though, her intuition had been way off the mark. She wondered about the double-length math period, for instance. "We don't have proof that this is improving students' learning," she said. "It's just making them more miserable." For Alan, the double-length class had crowded out his real interests. He had wanted to take classes in French and automotive skills, but he couldn't do both. Other students were able to pick 2 electives. Ritter's goal, in shadowing a student, was to look for ways to improve the student experience. Her day with Alan had helped her identify 2 potential leverage points: 1. Reconsidering the automatic slotting of students into double-length remedial periods, and 2. Encouraging faculty to be more interactive in their classrooms. The school would later act upon both of these ideas. The faculty received professional development in better engaging students, and the school subsequently changed its policy to ensure that every student could have at least 1 elective. Previously, some kids who had both a double reading and a double math course had no choice at all in their schedule. In this section, we'll explore 5 methods for identifying leverage points. Finding them will require some detective work. Sometimes they are hidden, masked by habits or assumptions. Other times, as we'll see on the next few pages, they can be quite obvious to anyone who looks. Either way, we have to go looking, and we have to know where to look. The tools in this section will give us 5 independent ways to conduct the hunt. What we're looking for are interventions that are both doable and worth doing. Doable, meaning that they are possible in the short term, and worth doing, because we aspire to move boulders, not pebbles. The first method for finding leverage points is the one used by Ritter, an approach that Nelson Repenning calls "go and see the work." Repenning is a professor at MIT who studies system dynamics. He told me that of all the principles he's shared with executives and students over the years, the one that most reliably pays off is, go and see the work. Meaning, if you're a school principal, shadow a student for the day. If you're a factory manager, follow the production from start to finish. If you're a consultant, map out the flow of activities on a single client engagement. Going and seeing the work is what the hospital receiving area team did. When they began their overhaul, they followed packages through the system, from the delivery dock to their ultimate destinations in the hospital. One executive, following Repenning's imperative to see the work, discovered that in his company, there was a woman who diligently maintained a repository of the firm's engineering documents. She spent long stretches of time printing high-definition color prints and organizing them in a room full of file cabinets. But there was a digital repository that auto-archived these files. It had existed for years, and word never got back to this poor woman. When you go see the work, wrote Repenning and two colleagues, Don Kiefer and Todd Astor, if you aren't embarrassed by what you find, you probably aren't looking closely enough. 2. Repenning, Kiefer, and Michael Morales published a revealing case study in MIT Sloan Management Review. Morales, the president of a Panama City plant that made corrugated boxes, wanted to understand why his paper losses during production were higher than the industry average. So he went to see the work. And the authors reported what happened next. Mike left his office and visited the factory floor to watch the work and understand its current design. He quickly observed numerous problems. The paper was often too wide, resulting in extra losses from cutting. In addition, paper rolls were often damaged by the forklifts that moved them. Perhaps most notably, Mike observed that the main corrugator machine stopped at 11:30 a.m. Assuming it was an unplanned outage, Mike rushed to the machine only to learn that the machine was stopped every day at lunch. Stopping and restarting the machine at lunchtime not only decreased productivity but also increased the probability of both damage to paper and mechanical problems. Interestingly, the lunch break turned out to be a response that had been instituted years ago in response to instability in the electric power provided by the local utility, a problem that had been fixed long ago. Morales's investigation, then, surfaced some obvious leverage points for whittling down paper waste. Within 2 months, paper losses fell from 21% to 15%, reflecting a savings of $50,000. Now, your first reaction to this story might be, well, sure, if you're doing stuff that's obviously dumb/wrong, then you can easily fix the dumb/wrong stuff. But be careful, Repenning and Kiefer wrote, we have discovered similarly obvious issues in almost every piece of work we have ever studied. Glaring problems are sometimes the legacy of past solutions, improvisations, and workarounds. Take the case of the paper plant. As the plant manager, you observe that you're getting unsteady power to your corrugating machine around lunchtime. It's not good for efficiency, and it's not good for the machine itself. So you schedule a shutdown every day to preserve the equipment. That's proactive and wise. A great short-term solution. But of course you'll never get an official announcement from the utility saying, all clear, so the daily shutdown continues. Weeks become months. Months become years, and habits become enshrined. Your plant depends on so many habits for its basic functioning that eventually you stop distinguishing them individually, and rather they just collectively become the way we do things. A new employee, learning the ropes, is taught, every day, at lunchtime. We shut down the corrugating machine. So what looks like mismanagement is often the accidental accretion of outdated habits. And the way you can begin to detect and ultimately erode that accretion is by going and seeing the work. You'll spot places where you and your team have acclimated to problems instead of fixing them. Those long tolerated bad habits are leverage points, correcting them is doable and worth doing. For knowledge work, this type of observation can be harder. You can trace a corrugated box through a factory. But can you trace, say, the development of a market analysis by a consulting firm? Yes. For sure, yes. But it's not as tangible. You will have to make it tangible by mapping out the flow. Okay, for the Kippen Trucking account, we first had the kickoff meeting, 2 hours, and then we prepared a research plan, 6 days, which we sent to the client, who returned feedback, 2 days, and then the engagement manager gave assignments to the 5 core team members, 1 day, and then you're making the invisible visible. Think whiteboards and markers. How long does each step take? Where does work get stuck or delayed? How do communications ping-pong between the team and the client? In what steps do the greatest leaps forward seem to happen? Protect those. And in what steps do the efforts seem to add little value? Rework or eliminate those. In short, you can still go and see the work. The key thing here, and the radical departure from normal, everyday work, is that you are substituting experience for conjecture. Tom Chi, a co-founder of X, the ambitious R&D lab at Google, said that most corporate decisions are made using guess-a-thons. People sit around and duel in the land of ideas. A sample meeting. Ted thinks you should try the bold strategy. Marissa hates Ted, so she pushes back on it. Helen, anxious about making decisions, always suggests waiting for more data. Greg is always a hair's breadth away from making a strained face and asking how will it affect the culture? Greg is everyone's least favorite part of the culture. And on it goes. Ultimately, as Chi said in a workshop, either the person who is best at arguing or the person with the highest title in the room ends up deciding. The tragedy, of course, is that when you make decisions that way, you've made important decisions based on cognitive vapor. Smart people will always come up with smart reasons for their guesses, said Chi, but that does not mean that their guesses are not guesses. Because it actually doesn't matter how much you agree or disagree if it sounds smart or doesn't sound smart. The only thing to listen for is, when I hear something, is it a guess or is it a direct experience? If it's a guess, it needs to be treated a certain way. But if it's a direct experience, then that's the stuff we want to make decisions off of. Kai's challenge to us is to get out of the medium of guesses and into the medium of reality. When we go and see the work, we stop debating ideas and start discovering them. 2. Going and seeing the work can be particularly important when things stop working. Your marriage hits a rocky patch. Your sales start drying up. Teachers leave your school faster than you can replace them. Because when unexpected problems arise in our organizations, it often reveals that we didn't know as much about our system as we thought we did. On this point, consider a study by the psychologists Leonid Rosenblatt and Frank Keel, who asked people to assess how well they understood certain familiar devices. How well do you understand how a zipper works? A flush toilet? People reported moderate levels of understanding. On a 7-point scale, with 7 reflecting the highest level of understanding, the average score landed a bit under 4. After the participants scored themselves, Rosenblatt and Keel put them to the test. Okay, write out a step-by-step explanation of how the device works, from the first step to the last. Feel free to draw pictures to get your meaning across. There's a great YouTube video that brings this study to life. A teenager named Alex Nickel, inspired by the research, asked some teenage peers to explain how a toilet works. Their answers were memorable. Teen 1, well, so there's a handle, and you flush it, and it goes through some machinery. Teen 2, there's like pipes going up to the top thing, and then you press the flusher thing, and then the water goes all around and it flushes the gross stuff out. Alex Nickel, how does that actually, flush it out? Teen 2, it goes down a pipe? I don't know. Teen 3, water comes out into the bowl and, pushes the stuff down. Alex Nickel, can you elaborate on that? The pushing? Teen 3, I'm not sure. To get back to the original study, after the participants had finished their explanations of the device, they were asked to rate their understanding of the device for a second time. Their self-assessments plummeted. Nearly all participants showed drops in estimates of what they knew, wrote Rosenblatt and Keel in their 2002 study. The psychologists called this the illusion of explanatory depth. As they wrote, most people feel they understand the world with far greater detail, coherence, and depth than they really do. When participants were prodded to produce an explanation, they realized, I know a lot less than I thought. In another study of this illusion, conducted by Rebecca Lawson and published in Memory and Cognition, people were presented with this skeletal picture of a bicycle frame and asked to add pedals, a chain, and the remaining parts of the frame to the sketch. Before you look down, pause. Could you do this exercise correctly? How confident are you? One person drew a bike like this. Take a second to analyze what's wrong here. One problem, this bike won't move, the pedals aren't attached to any moving part of the system. And look how high the pedals are. Are people supposed to pedal with their kneecaps? Here was another participant's bike. At first glance, this looks pretty fancy. Spokes and hand brakes were added, unsolicited, for extra realism. But notice the chain and the frame are connecting both wheels, which means this bike can't be turned. It's a one-way ticket to the emergency room. Here's one more point of interest about that last bike, the person who drew it reported that they went cycling most days, presumably in a straight line. I'm poking fun, but let me confess, I had to look up the answer about how a bike works. I'm pretty sure I would have drawn the chain around both wheels, too. So I'm inclined to empathize with the cyclist. After all, you don't need to understand the bike to use it effectively. Isn't a functional understanding sufficient? The problem comes when we mistake functional understanding for systemic understanding. We think because we can use something, because it operates as we expect, that we understand it. And that's a problem, because when the bike, or the zipper or the toilet stops working, we're sunk. We realize that underneath our functional level of understanding, there's nothing. 3. That sudden awakening is what befalls many businesses just as they are plunged into crisis. Businesses struggle, and their leaders think, it'll turn around. Just wait a little longer. I've run this place for 10 years. We've been through hard times. But then, sometimes, things don't turn around. And because dramatic action wasn't taken earlier, when it was a choice, it becomes mandatory. Change or go bankrupt. In those situations when a business is in danger of failing, investors or board members might hire a turnaround consultant. That's someone who parachutes into the company, takes over the place, makes a bunch of changes, and then leaves after a few months. Consider how odd this arrangement is. You might think that if your business was in a pickle, you'd seek advice from someone with turnaround expertise, the way that you might visit a therapist if your marriage was foundering. This isn't that. This is handing over the reins to a stranger. It's like letting the therapist move in with your spouse, fix the relationship, then turn it back over to you. 3. Despite the dire circumstances involved, businesses on the brink of bankruptcy, turnarounds frequently succeed. We're used to thinking about organizational change as slow. But, no, in these situations, a company might be rescued from life support to basic health in a matter of months. So let's think like a turnaround consultant. You're coming into a company that once was viable and now isn't. This predicament triggers the shift from functional to systemic understanding, as in the toilet and bike examples above. Things were working, now they aren't. How do you quickly make sense of what's wrong and how to fix it? Turnaround consultants go and see the work. For they walk the halls, they observe the production lines. But because they aren't experts in the particular business they're now running, the observation is not enough. They need guidance. So in trying to understand the reality of a business, turnaround artists go straight to the front lines. If you really want to know what's going on in an organization, you always ask the people closest to the customer and closest to the core activity, whether it's providing a service or making something, said the turnaround consultant Paul Fioravanti on a podcast. Jeff Vogel saying, a turnaround consultant with Promontory Point Partners seconds the approach. I go to people and say, this is a private conversation. I'm not gonna share anything you say. I'm looking for common themes. I'm looking for your opinions. And they'll say, I don't care. I'll tell you everything. They can fire me. Then they'll puke out everything that has gone on, everything that's wrong. Alright, 10 pages of notes, 90% of it turns out to be accurate and 10% is emotional or a personal grudge. Within 2 weeks, the people who work there will tell you what's going on, if you're good at asking open questions and shutting up and letting them ramble. As a methodology, this could not be simpler. To find out what's going on in your organization, talk to the people who make it run. Here's what customers really think of us. Here's why our plant is so messed up. Here's why the software updates are always late. There's no black magic. It's just listening. Parenthetically, when I've shared this idea with people, I sometimes get a polarized reaction. Some people have a cynical attitude, frontline people are just clock punchers. If I ask them what's wrong, they're gonna say they work too hard or they don't get paid enough. And others have an overly romantic view. Yes, power to the front lines. They do all the hard work and nobody listens to them. They could run the place better than the suits. I sometimes wonder whether either group, cynical or romantic, has actually met any frontline people. Because the truth is, they're just people. They have smart ideas and dumb ideas. The advice is not, consult them because they're wise, selfless oracles. The advice is, consult them because they know their jobs better than you, and their jobs are closer to reality than yours. Going and seeing the work, ultimately, is about observation and consultation. I see we turn off the corrugating machine every day. Why do we do that? We thought we were helping students with a double-length remedial math course, but is there any proof it's working? Or are we just doubling their suffering? The payoff for this observational effort can be profound. Imagine if you could locate and stop the dumbest things your team is doing, the ill-advised, the pointless, the self-sabotaging. Boom, gone. What would that be worth? There are unmistakable areas for improvement that we may never see and brilliant ideas for change that we'll never unlock unless we go and see the work. Ira Penning's phrasing is a riff on a well-known operations concept called going to the Gemba, which originated with Taiki Ono, the godfather of the Toyota production system. Gemba comes from a Japanese term meaning the actual place. To note that this spirit of examination, the genuine desire to get closer to the truth, is the heart of going and seeing the work. This is in sharp contrast to the CEO who conducts a stage-managed visit to a factory or field office for the sake of good optics. I am an enlightened leader who enjoys mingling with you common folk. 3. Could someone start working on body turnaround consultants? Just call me when my six-pack is ready. 4. Wait, never mind about the body turnaround thing. Whirlwind Review, Chapter 1, Go and See the Work. 1. The first way to identify leverage points is to observe our work more closely. As Nelson Repenning says, go and see the work. Assistant Principal Karen Ritter uncovered some hard truths about her school by shadowing a student. 2. When you go and see the work, you often discover that you've been oblivious to problems, or have acclimated to them, instead of fixing them. The president of the paper plant discovered that the corrugating machine was being shut down every day at lunch because of an energy problem that had been resolved years earlier. Mismanagement is often the accidental accretion of outdated habits. 3. Going and seeing the work is far preferable to the usual conference room style of hatching improvements, what Tom Chi calls guess-a-thons. To find real leverage points, you must get out of the medium of guesses and into the medium of reality. 4. When you're trying to improve your work, you'll often discover that you have functional understanding rather than systemic understanding. Without that systemic understanding, it's hard to make things better. Even regular cyclists couldn't draw a bicycle accurately. That's the illusion of explanatory depth. 5. But it's possible to gain systemic understanding quickly. Turnaround consultants do it by going straight to the front lines. The people who work there will tell you what's going on if you shut up and let them talk. 6. Ultimately, going and seeing the work is about getting closer to the reality of the situation and perceiving it with fresh eyes. That's how you find promising leverage points. Recommendations: find live links at danheath.com/reset-links. Note from Dan Heath: here's a quick explanation of these recommendations sections that follow each chapter. These are not sources per se. The endnotes are at the back of the book. Rather, the recommendations offer tips about places to explore beyond the book. Sometimes the links give extra color to the points made in the text, sometimes they're the original sources cited, when I think those sources are worth a deeper dive, sometimes they're interesting tangents. The links are underlined below, but please know that I am not an insane person who thinks you can poke your finger at them to visit a website. The idea here is that you should visit the website danheath.com/reset-links, and there you'll find this exact paragraph below, except that the links will be clickable. Happy hunting! In this talk, which I highly recommend, the engineer and innovator Tom Chi describes how he fights against guess-a-thons and gets his teams working in the medium of reality. To see what it's like for a principal to step into the reality of a student, watch the PBS NewsHour segment I mention in the chapter. You'll see Assistant Principal Karen Ritter run sprints, battle back-to-back sections of algebra, and write an essay alongside her 9th grade shadowy, Alan Garcia. If you'd like to take a deeper look at the illusion of explanatory depth research, head here for the academic article. And to see that video of teenagers struggling to explain toilets, go here. If you're curious about the swashbuckling world of turnaround specialists, start with James Shine's Reversing the Slide. Shine's book is both sharp and irreverent, making for an engaging read. Or, take a listen to my conversation with the turnaround consultant Jeff Vogelsang, whom I interviewed on my podcast, What It's Like to Be. He's the guy quoted in this chapter saying that when you interview frontline people, they'll puke out everything that was relevant. For more on Going to the Gemba, the inspiration for MIT professor Nelson Repenning's Go and See the Work advice, check out The Toyota Way. It's a great summary of the Toyota production system, much beloved by operations gurus. In this article and this talk, Repenning details how you can increase the visibility of the work you and your team are doing. This is especially important for knowledge work, Repenning points out, where feedback is natural. 2. Consider the goal of the goal. You can find leverage points by identifying alternate pathways to your ultimate destination. Consider the goal of the goal. 1. On July 15, 2022, Ryan Davidson bought a new pickup truck, a Ram 1500. To celebrate, he planned to take it on a camping trip the next weekend. Then, a few days after he drove it off the lot, the survey shakedown began. The dealership texted him on July 20 asking for a rating from 0 to 10 on the overall buying experience. He texted back a 9. On July 21, Brittany, a customer care assistant, emailed him, asking, "Is there anything that we could have done better?" The next day, a Friday, she sent another email, wondering, "How could we have made your experience more pleasant?" The next Monday, undeterred by his non-response, she sent a third email, "There is just one thing that we would like to know. How could your purchasing experience have been better?" That same Monday, another person from the dealership, Megan, texted him to see whether he needed anything. And his salesperson texted, too. You get the sense that if a loved one died, the salesperson would send flowers and a survey. On Wednesday, the dealership texted him again, stating, "Our team would really appreciate your positive responses." Davidson could sympathize with the dealership's desire for feedback, because at the time he was in charge of customer experience for a healthcare software firm. He, too, had to keep tabs on customer satisfaction. He could relate. So, he took the time to fill out the survey. Gave some high scores, some low, reflecting his experience. He left thoughtful comments so the dealership could understand his ratings. He also replied to Brittany, who'd been desperate for that one thing that would have improved his experience. He wrote, "I liked the people I worked with, my salesperson and my finance specialist. They were easy to work with and made it an enjoyable experience." Then he elaborated on what could have gone better. "Things I didn't like was the experience of seeing all of the additional items that get added to the final purchase price that I then have to negotiate out or negotiate down with a lot of back and forth, as everyone had to check with a higher up while I wait. I hated that. Still," he concluded on a positive note, "I'd buy from you again and intend to stick with this dealership for service. Thanks for asking." He never heard from Brittany again. Within hours of submitting his survey, his salesperson texted him again, "Hey, Ryan, did I do anything wrong? I got a low score." Davidson wrote back, "Not it. All had nothing but great things to say about you. I hope they let you read it." The salesperson replied, "I understand that, but every single score mattered." Since then, Davidson said, the dealership lost the paperwork on the bed cover he bought with his truck. 2 months later, I still don't have a bed cover. And every text and email I sent have gone unanswered, which leaves me feeling it is payback for the fair and helpful survey I sent, he said. 2. Let's lift our view of Davidson's horror story to the systems level. Because this is a story of change gone wrong. Badly wrong. The leaders at Stellantis, the multinational that owns Dodge, Chrysler, Jeep, and Ram, were surely not intending to produce stories like this one. No doubt. Their original intent was pretty respectable. We want to create a great car buying experience for our customers. That mission is big, long-term, and somewhat diffuse. What kind of shorter-term goal might serve that long-term mission? Boosting customer satisfaction scores. And my guess is that the team at the dealership where Davidson bought his truck did, in fact, make progress toward that short-term goal. Probably their customer satisfaction scores were outstanding. But their success was due not to their passion for improving the customer experience, but rather to their prowess at browbeating customers into providing falsely inflated scores. That's a sad kind of excellence. If you were a senior brand leader at Ram, you'd surely want to sniff out this discrepancy. How could you do it? By going and seeing the work. The problems that Ryan Davidson experienced were not subtle at all. I mean, his salesperson responded to his text about having his brand new truck's windows bashed in by saying, "Aw man, bummer, but anywho, about that survey," but to spot problems, even obvious ones, you do have to look. All it would have taken, to surface silly antics like the dealership's, was a single in-person visit, perhaps by someone posing as a potential customer. That visit would have revealed that the dealership's actual behavior was making a mockery of its mission. At that point, surely the leaders would have realized, we're moving the numbers, but they're the wrong numbers. You should embrace the same discipline in your own change efforts. Before you strain yourself to budge a boulder, it's worth asking, are you targeting the right boulder? You don't want to fall into the dealership's trap of relentlessly chasing a goal and triumphantly making progress on your measures, only to discover, whoops, that it was all misdirected energy. One simple way to avoid that misalignment, a goal that's inconsistent with the real mission, is to ask a simple but powerful question: what's the goal of the goal? The British advertising guru Rory Sutherland gave a great example of this idea in action. In 2007, Eurostar had finished upgrading the rail route from London to Paris, shaving the travel time from 2 hours 35 minutes to 2 hours 15 minutes. The total price tag was roughly £6 billion, and the goal of the investment had been to speed up the route. Mission accomplished. But what was the goal of the goal? If the goal, ultimately, was to make things better for the passengers, was that investment well spent? Sutherland was dubious. For 0.01% of this money, you could have put Wi-Fi on the trains, which wouldn't have reduced the duration of the journey, but would have improved its enjoyment and its usefulness far more. He said in a 2011 speech. For maybe 10% of the money, you could have paid all of the world's top male and female supermodels to walk up and down the train, handing out free Chateau Petrus to all the passengers. You'd still have £5 billion in change, and people would ask for the trains to be slowed down. We can get so fixated on a goal that we miss the bigger picture. And when we lock into a particular goal too quickly, we blind ourselves to alternate routes forward that might have been better and easier. In early 2023, I studied a group of people as they set New Year's resolutions and began to work toward them. Marissa Lavars, an Australian mother of 2, had initially declared this as her goal: I'd like to get fit, or fitter, to be able to go about my daily activities without being breathless, and to lose a bit of weight so I can fit into my pre-COVID clothes. Lavars had significant health challenges. She was struggling with heart Problems triggered by COVID, and as if that weren't enough, she had recently been diagnosed with breast cancer. Her reference to being breathless was no exaggeration. Everyday activities like showering could exhaust her. Her heart rate sometimes spiked to 180 even when she was lying down. After LeVars submitted her resolution to get fitter, the survey prompted her to consider why that goal was important to her. In other words, what was the goal of her goal? Here's what LeVars wrote: "Absolutely, my kids. I want to be the best mom I can be for them, and part of that is being healthy, but it also means modeling for them living my best life." Then, the survey asked her, what are 10 different ways you could achieve Oregon approach that aspiration, other than by following your initial resolution? Suddenly, her answers changed dramatically. Here is what she wrote about her alternate pathways. "Things have been pretty serious for us this past year. I could find some ways to bring back some fun into our lives, as fun at times has been in short supply. We used to have some pretty locked-in routines in the evening, where things stopped and we did some reading, writing, and maths, and then I would read to them. This has been pretty pared back or hasn't occurred at all. This would be important to get back to doing. I would like to bring back music into our lives." LeVars realized, immediately, that these ideas would get her closer to success. Then the fitness-oriented goals. "I already feel a sense of lightheartedness through going through this process," she wrote. "It feels more connected to the why." Within a few months, she had dreamed up a variety of ways that she could create moments with her twin 7-year-old boys, despite her poor health. She'd bought some rocking chairs for the veranda. They would sit outside and rock and watch their guinea pigs play. She bought the Harry Potter 6,000-piece Lego set. They'd been opening one bag of the kit each week. She had also started a tradition of playing board games. Even at her worst, lying on the couch with an ice pack, trying to bring her heart rate down, she could still participate. She'd call out, "Who's gonna roll the dice?" She'd tease, "Did you cheat? Even if I'm vomiting, I'll still be playing the bloody board game." She laughed. "It just feels really doable. And it's great for the kids too, they're just so much more settled because they know that mom is still mom." She looks back with amusement on her initial resolution. She had been thinking, "I have to get fit, because I have to spend more time with the kids." I look back now and go, I would never have actually done that, or I would have felt bad about it. By reconsidering her first goal and contemplating instead the goal of the goal, she was able to ensure that the progress she made amounted to something meaningful for herself and her kids. 3. Another tool for exploring the goal of the goal is a technique that comes from the discipline of solutions-focused therapy. It's called the miracle question. The therapist says the following: imagine that in the middle of the night tonight, as you are sleeping, a miracle happens. The problem you are stressed about has been solved. Poof. Gone. But the miracle happened when you were sleeping, so when you first wake up, you have no way of knowing it happened. What are the first things you notice, as you start your day, that reveal to you that the miracle happened? A therapist named Linda Metcalf asked the miracle question to a couple, Elaine and Felix, whose marriage was on the rocks. Here were their answers. Elaine: when we were first married, we were best friends. In our miracle, we would be best friends again. We would be doing things we did. Then dancing, hiking, talking, and more talking. Felix: the kids would be better behaved and we would share the responsibility for the kids more equally. Sometimes I think I have to do everything. In the miracle, she wouldn't get on the phone with her sisters at night and we would help the kids with their schoolwork together. Elaine: we wouldn't be so resentful and distrusting. Instead we would sit down and plan together for a change, like we used to. Felix: I think she's wonderful and I want her to want me again. In the miracle, she would look up from her book when I came home and be glad to see me. Think of the magic of this question. Felix and Elaine came to therapy because their marriage was in trouble. It was a fraught emotional situation, big and thorny and depressing. But, in response to the miracle question, listen to how they talk. We would sit down and plan together. She would look up from her book when I came home. It's a wonderfully tangible vision. Having answered the question, they now know how to proceed. As the therapist Metcalf said, Elaine never knew that simply glancing up at him when he came in at night would mean so much. He had no idea that she still would like to go dancing like they used to. Those are leverage points. Small things that could make a big difference. 2. The miracle question is not just for therapy. In a work setting, it can surface disagreements about your direction. As an example, maybe your boss yammers constantly about being a customer-centric organization. But nobody has quite the same understanding of what that means. So ask the miracle question to the team, okay, we wake up tomorrow and we've transformed into a customer-centric organization. What are the first things we notice? I have used this question myself in organizational change workshops, and the question can be transformative. But be warned, it usually requires some persistence. Usually, people hem and haw a bit and then leap to how they'd be feeling. I'd be so happy. I'd feel so relieved. That's a good start. But keep redirecting them to the visible signs of the miracle. What did you notice that clued you in that something great had happened? When you steer the conversation toward observations, you ensure that it's tangible enough to flush out any hidden disagreement. One person says, well, after the customer-centric miracle happens, I'd get to work and I'd bump into a group that was leaving HQ to spend time at a customer site, to get to know the customer's problems better. Another chimes in, oh, I wasn't thinking about it that way, I was thinking that it was more about cutting internal projects that weren't directly connected to the customer. Now you have something useful to argue about. Because in the absence of this debate about the true meaning of customer centricity, you and your colleagues would be unwittingly working at cross purposes. The power of the miracle question is in the way it sharpens and narrows your view of success. A miracle has happened, and your marriage is fixed. How do you know it? Because your wife looked up from her book when you walked in. Notice that this is essentially the reciprocal of the goal question, which compels us to broaden out, starting with the goal and then widening the view to ask what its true intent was. What's the goal of the goal helps us see the destination and why it's important. A leverage point must be something worth doing. The miracle question helps us identify the first productive steps toward that destination. A leverage point must be something doable. Broaden and narrow. The two prompts together serve as a clarifying tandem, a yin and yang of finding our way. 4. Picking the wrong boulder and thus the wrong leverage points is a recipe for failure. I spoke with one CEO who said that, in each of the last 3 companies he had run, he had started by getting the teams focused on the right boulder. Interestingly, in all 3 cases, the team's previous focus had been on something extra, ancillary businesses or acquisitions, and this CEO led them to refocus on the health of the core business. Achieving clarity on the way forward is not an incremental victory. It is transformative. It can mean the difference between stuck and unstuck. A group of federal government leaders experienced this transformation several years ago when they rethought the goal of a program that served people with disabilities, including veterans. Some context: anyone with a total permanent disability, TPD, can, by law, have their federal student loans discharged. But thousands of veterans didn't take advantage of the program. This was a disappointment to many government leaders, whose goal was simple: make it easy for veterans to apply for the benefits they deserve. What was holding back participation in the program? To some extent it was knowledge. Many simply didn't realize they were eligible for forgiveness. Others got derailed by the cumbersome application process. The stakes were high. Some of these borrowers were actually in default, potentially having their Social Security disability payments garnished to make loan payments. The government was reaching into their pockets to claim money for loans that they shouldn't have owed. So what could be done? In 2016, a team at the Department of Education, Ed, thought, rather than make the borrowers responsible for discovering this benefit, let's proactively tell them about it. They hatched a plan that led them to compare the databases at several agencies, including the Ed and the Department of Veterans Affairs, VA. The Ed database could tell you who has student loans. The VA database could tell you which veterans are permanently disabled. Anyone who matched both databases was eligible for a loan discharge. By mid-2018, the VA and ED had identified around 50,000 veterans who qualified for forgiveness. Thousands of them were in default on those loans they didn't owe. Letters were sent to all of them, informing them that they were eligible for forgiveness and specifying how to claim it. So far, so good. But then came another problem. The notification sent to veterans came under the letterhead of a private organization, the Student Loan Servicer. The letter directed people to file their applications at a URL called disabilitydischarge.com. To some recipients, it smelled a little fishy. Why? Isn't this coming from the VA? Why isn't it a .gov address? Is this story going to end with someone absconding to Cabo San Lucas with the remainder of my checking account? As one government insider told me, veterans just wouldn't do it. They were scared. I mean, it was every red flag you could possibly imagine. In this situation, how could you encourage veterans to file their applications for forgiveness? Well, maybe send a less suspicious letter. Or set up a .gov website. Maybe some tweaks would ease the veterans' concerns. But in 2019, the agency leaders stopped trying to iterate a broken process and took a hard look at the goal of the goal. What's our goal? To help veterans apply for the loan forgiveness they've earned. And what's the goal of the goal? To improve their financial security. What are alternate pathways for achieving that goal, other than having them apply for forgiveness? Well, why don't we forget about the whole application process? Why do they need to apply at all? We can figure out who they are. Let's tell them that we can just forgive their loans. And then after they're okay, we'll let them know it's done. 3. There was a recognition that the letters clearly weren't working, and there was a big push to make this automatic. A senior official at the Department of Education said, "It would be good for the borrowers, but it could also be good for us. It could save us the time of processing a bunch of applications, sending them back again if they need to be corrected. Could this be a win-win for everybody?" It was a radically simple idea, but it was no easy feat to implement. Just getting permission from different government agencies to compare databases essential for forgiving loans required a blizzard of paperwork that had taken months and months to push through. The ripple effects of this policy shift have been broad and profound. Tens of thousands of disabled veterans, many of whom, again, had been in default, had their financial lives transformed. One disabled Navy veteran saw her loan balance go from over $72,000 to zero. "I felt immense relief," she told a reporter. I cried about it. I ugly cried about it. The program was so successful, in fact, that it has since been expanded to other situations where people have earned, but not claimed, loan forgiveness. And that's often the way leverage points are uncovered. Someone comes up with a better way of doing things, and you think, aha, I can do that, too. But, as we'll see next, it doesn't always have to be someone else whom you learn from. The secrets of success might be right there, in your own team, hidden in plain sight. And for even sadder excellence, when Davidson was still in the process of buying his truck, the sales rep brought over a framed version of the survey that Davidson would eventually be asked to fill out. The sales rep walked him through every question on it and told him what the right answer to each question should be. On the question, "How would you rate your sales consultant overall?" he instructed Davidson to give him a 10 out of 10. The sales rep also thoughtfully gave Davidson a laminated take-home copy of the survey, with right answers filled in, for further study and reflection. All of these maneuvers provide a killer illustration of Goodhart's law: when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. To note that the miracle question is not the same as getting wishes from a genie. In my miracle, I'd win the lottery and my husband would look like George Clooney and my kids would be kind. The question can provide clarity but not magic. It's only the third part of that wish, "my kids would be kind," where the question could realistically provide some traction. What would you notice, behaviorally, if you woke up and your kids had become kind? Do you sometimes see those behaviors already, even if infrequently? Are there things that you do that seem to elicit those good behaviors? Etc. 3. Why did they need an OK first? There was a tax issue in some states. Forgiven loans might be treated as income, meaning that the vet would get an income tax bill for the forgiven loan. That's why the loan couldn't be forgiven automatically. Whirlwind Review, Chapter 2, Consider the goal of the goal. 1. The second way to identify leverage points is to take a careful and even skeptical look at the goals you are pursuing. Too often organizations set numerical targets as goals. Yet you can succeed at hitting these targets while utterly failing at your mission. The dealership attracted great scores for customer satisfaction, but only because they were browbeating customers into rating them highly, regardless of their actual experience. 3. To avoid that misalignment of goals and mission, you need to ask, what's the goal of the goal? And are there alternate pathways that might get us there more easily or quickly than the original goal we'd selected? A Marissa of ours, a mother struggling with health problems, had originally set her New Year's resolution to get fitter. But after pondering the goal of the goal, she saw clearly. She wanted to be able to engage with her kids more often and more playfully. For you can achieve more clarity about the goal of the goal by asking the miracle question. The miracle question, in short, a miracle happened overnight that fixed your critical problem. What are the first things you notice, after you wake up, that reveal the miracle has happened? B. The married couple Elaine and Felix used the miracle question to identify little things that could change. She would look up from her book When I Came Home. 5. What's the goal of the goal? Helps you see the destination and why it's important. A leverage point must be something worth doing. The miracle question helps you identify the first productive steps toward that destination. A leverage point must be something doable. 6. Achieving clarity on where you're really headed can be transformative. The Department of Education changed its strategy from making it easier to apply for loan forgiveness to proactively forgiving those loans. As a result, tens of thousands of people were helped. Recommendations: find live links at danheath.com/reset-links. If you need help picking the right boulder, i.e., knowing what to focus on in your work, then I'd recommend The Thoughtful and Practical Bulletproof Problem Solving by Charles Kahn and Robert McLean. Rory Sutherland offers an insightful take on potential solutions we overlook because we don't think deep enough about the psychological goals of what we're building. His Eurostar example, mentioned briefly in this chapter, comes around minute 6. Linda Metcalf literally wrote the book on the miracle question, a step-by-step guide to seeing your way quickly through confounding situations to meaningful and lasting change. Its primary focus is on personal relationships, but it also includes some advice on how to build more effective connections within the workplace. If the truck buying story inspired you to think more carefully about how to set the right goals, check out this paper called Goals Gone Wild, and an accompanying Q&A. 3. Study the bright spots. You can find leverage points by analyzing your own best work. Study the bright spots. 1. In 1926, U.S. military leaders were designing an airplane cockpit for the first time. The bodies of hundreds of pilots were tape measured, and the average of those measurements informed designs for the size and shape of the seat and the height of the windshield. For decades, that standard design endured. Then, in 1950, it was time for an update. Gilbert S. Daniels, a 23-year-old lieutenant, was part of the Corps redesign team. This time, the team measured over 4,000 pilots, studying 140 separate dimensions: thumb length, crotch height, span from eye to ear. The idea was that with more precise specifications, a more ergonomic cockpit could be created, which would lead to better pilot performance and fewer crashes. Or so it was thought. Daniels was skeptical. Were the average dimensions really the key consideration? How many pilots were average? Daniels combed through the data. He analyzed 10 physical dimensions in particular, including height and sleeve length, that were thought to be critical for designing cockpits. For each dimension, he computed the average. For height, it was 5 feet 9 inches. Then he broadened the average to include everyone who was in the middle 30% of the distribution. So, with height, the 30% middle range included all pilots between 5 feet 7 inches and 5 feet 11 inches. Daniels asked himself, how many pilots were in the middle range on all 10 dimensions? Here's what Daniels found, according to Todd Rose, who tells the story in his fascinating book The End of Average. Even Daniels was stunned when he tabulated the actual number. 0. Out of 4,063 pilots, not a single airman fit within the average range on all 10 dimensions. One pilot might have a longer than average arm length, but a shorter than average leg length. Another pilot might have a big chest but small hips. Even more astonishing, Daniels discovered that if you picked out just 3 of the 10 dimensions of size, say, neck circumference, thigh circumference, and wrist circumference, less than 3.5% of pilots would be average sized on all 3 dimensions. Daniels's findings were clear and incontrovertible. There was no such thing as an average pilot. If you've designed a cockpit to fit the average pilot, you've actually designed it to fit no one. The Air Force's leaders, to their credit, took this finding seriously. They abandoned the idea of tailoring the cockpit to an average pilot. Instead, they asked airplane manufacturers to create an adjustable environment, one that could accommodate pilots whose measurements spanned almost the full spectrum of possibilities, from the 5th to the 95th percentile on each dimension. The manufacturers squawked. Such customization would be too expensive, too slow. Eventually, though, they did what most business leaders do when confronted with losing gigantic customer orders: they caved. And they figured it out. Suddenly, everything could be tweaked. Adjustable foot pedals, adjustable seats, adjustable helmet straps. All could be tailored to the individual pilot. As a result, pilot performance soared in the years afterward. 2. Like the Air Force, you need to rebel against averages. Most leaders oversee their organizations using averages and aggregations. Revenue is an aggregation. Profit margin is an average. Net Promoter Score is an average. Averages are great for monitoring but terrible for diagnosis. Averages can tell us something's wrong, but they're unlikely to tell us what's wrong, or how to fix it. To find a leverage point, we must push beyond averages. Disaggregate our rolled up numbers. Disentangle the individual people and products and customers that together compose our organizations. What we're looking for, in this chapter, is something very specific, within the context of your goal. When have you been at your best? Let's call those unusually positive data points your bright spots, a term my brother Chip and I used in our book Switch. In the context of employee engagement, your bright spots would be your most engaged employees. In the context of corporate training, your bright spots would be the most effective or highly rated events. In the context of your own efforts to cut back on sweets, your bright spots would be the days you managed to avoid eating a brownie in the afternoon. Bright spots make great leverage points because you know they're possible. If you've done something once, you can probably do it again. But bright spots are typically buried in averages, so they are not self-evident. You've got to excavate them. That was Ken Davis's mission when, in 2009, he was asked to handle a crisis, a plunge in customer retention caused by the Great Recession. Davis worked at Gartner, the public research and consulting firm, and one of the company's key businesses involved selling market research subscriptions to corporate clients. In the aftermath of the economic crisis, as clients looked for places to trim expenses, costly research subscriptions looked like a tempting place to start. For a subscription business, retention is the single most important measure of health. Do your customers want to keep buying what you're selling? And Gartner's customers were increasingly saying no. By the middle of 2009, the wallet retention rate had dropped to about 84%. Meaning, for every $100 in subscriptions Gartner had sold in 2008, they were averaging $84 in 2009. Not good. The people in charge of retention at Gartner were called client partners. And Davis's first move, after taking over the group, was to go and see the work. As he learned more about the client partners and their work, he was struck by the disjunction between goals and activities. The number one goal of the group was to maximize retention, yet much of their time was spent doing ancillary work. Booking sales orders, collaborating with salespeople on selling new deals, and more. A big part of my initial work was clearing the decks of all distractions, said Davis. We needed to focus on the most important economic driver and literally drop everything else. We'll return to this theme later in Chapter 8, Do Less and More. In the next stage of his work, he dug into the data for clients who had renewed and clients who had churned. One insight came quickly: those clients who regularly used their subscriptions were more likely to renew. Obvious, perhaps. But the next insight was not so obvious, and it came from untangling averages. Let's start with the graph below. The bar height represents the number of client partners who achieved different levels of retention. The vast majority of client partners, namely, everyone below 100%, were losing money relative to the previous year. Despite the abundant bad news contained in the chart, Davis's attention was drawn to the far left of the graph. This was extraordinary. There were 17 client partners who had 100% or better wallet retention. To go over 100% would mean that the accounts they managed spent more money this year than last year, a sign of a healthy business. This was outstanding performance in the face of a recession. What were these high-performing client partners doing that was different from all the others? Ken Davis launched a study of his team's bright spots. He believed that there must be differences in behavior underlying their differences in performance. Davis and his colleagues started asking the client partners some basic questions about how they managed their day. How do you set up your calendar? How do you plan your week? How do you take notes? How do you prepare for a call? And so on. Using these conversations, Davis and his team assembled a laundry list of common practices. Once these common practices had been compiled, Davis surveyed each client partner about their own behavior. Here's a list of practices that your colleagues use. Which ones do you use? Armed with those survey results, Davis was ready to answer the question: what are my A performers doing differently from my F performers? As an example, consider the practice of using a follow-up process, getting back to clients with any resources or information that they requested on a call. Here's the percentage of A and F performers who reported using that practice. What do these numbers tell us? In a nutshell, this ain't it. Using a follow-up process is not what distinguishes the top performers from the bottom, because both groups follow up in roughly equal numbers. By contrast, check out this finding. That's a huge gap. Almost all the As used a defined daily process, and only a third of the FS did. And what is this mysterious, defined daily process? It's basically thoughtful time management. One example from a performer: I reach out to 30 to 40 clients a week. I use Monday as a call-out day and prioritize my call-outs based on renewal dates. 2. As a result of this bright spots work, Davis unlocked the second big insight. Client partners had demonstrated radically different success rates at getting their clients to use their subscriptions, which was the single biggest factor in determining whether they ultimately renewed. So a behavior like defined daily process, 1, allowed the client partner to make more client calls, and those calls, 2, encouraged clients to use their subscriptions more, which, 3, boosted their odds of renewing. That was the logic of success. In all, a set of 9 specific behaviors seemed to separate the top performers from the worst. By studying the bright spots, Davis had uncovered a credible explanation for the difference in performance. So his next move was to get his full team to push harder on those leverage points. The bright spot partners trained the whole team on what they were doing. Here's how I set up my calendar. Here's how I keep tabs on what my clients' business priorities are. As a result, the B, C, D, and F client partners started getting better. It wasn't mysterious what was driving better performance, it was an identifiable set of behaviors, and the client partners could practice and master them. The results of this work were stunning. The year after the work began, Gartner had its best ever level of retention. 3. Then, in the second year, the retention number improved again. And again in the third year and the fourth. For 10 years in a row, the retention number kept hitting greater and greater highs. Every year, they ran the same game plan. They studied the bright spots from the year prior, identified the key leverage points, and spread those practices to the full team. Davis's goal was for the whole team to achieve the level of performance that the bright spots had achieved the previous year. A rough estimate is that Gartner's revenue increased by at least $100 million as a result of this relentless focus on untangling the averages. Pretty astonishing results from just studying your own people at their best. 3. By studying bright spots, we can identify the circumstances that allow us to succeed. And if we understand those circumstances, we can replicate them, allowing our success to spread. You can analyze bright spots on any level: bright spots in your own life, bright spots in a team, bright spots among different departments in one organization, or even bright spots across different organizations doing similar kinds of work. Kate Hurley adopted that last approach in her quest to improve animal shelters. Hurley was a veterinarian and the first person in the world to do a residency in the new field of shelter medicine, which is devoted to studying shelters as a system with multiple goals: keeping animals healthy, reducing euthanasia, ensuring the health of the animal population within the community. In one of her first consulting assignments, Hurley and a fellow shelter medicine expert named Julie Levy worked with the city shelter in Jacksonville, Florida. The shelter was dangerously overpopulated. Only 1 cat in 10 was leaving the shelter alive. The remainder were either euthanized or died from diseases that spread like wildfire through the overcrowded facility. It was spiraling downward, said the shelter director, Ebenezer Gajayarlaputi. We were running out of room. There was disease and rats. We were having to kill a lot of small kittens because they were getting sick. The shelter workers were unhappy, ground down by the relentless cycle of euthanasia. Keep in mind, these are animal people. In a cruel irony, their jobs demanded that they put down animals. You start getting angry, Gajayarlaputi said, or you begin to lose hope. Hurley empathized with them. In her days as an animal control officer, she'd had to handle the euthanasia, too. It was one of the experiences that had sparked her interest in shelter medicine, reassessing shelters from a systems perspective. In the midst of this Jacksonville dystopia emerged an idea so big and so effective that it would come to transform the world of shelters. The idea came from Gajayarlaputi, the person who had hired Hurley and Levy to consult. He was actually new to shelters. As head of another city department, he'd recently been tasked with overseeing animal care and control in Jacksonville. He didn't know what he didn't know, but that ignorance would turn out to be genius. To understand his idea, we first have to understand the practice of TNR. Trap, neuter, return. As Hurley explained, so that's where you've got some cats living in your alley. You don't want them having a million babies. You don't want the males yelling and pissing on your car. In most communities, there's a TNR clinic where you can trap the cat and then bring it to a clinic. We spay it or neuter it, vaccinate it for rabies and other cat infections, and cut the tip off its ear, so other veterinarians will know it's been done. Then we just put it back. In most communities, TNR was handled by clinics and not by the shelters, whose goal was to find new homes for the cats through adoption. So let's get back to Gajayarlaputi, who was facing an overcrowded facility, where 9 out of 10 incoming cats would end up dead. He saw that some of the cats coming into the shelter had clipped ears. When he brought this up with the TNR clinic, they explained what the clipped ears meant and asked whether they could take those cats back, thereby taking them off Gajayarlaputi's hands. They'd already released them once, might as well try it again. Then Gajayarlaputi asked a fateful follow-up, would you also like to take some of these other cats who aren't ear-tipped? You could just do your TNR thing and release them, and that way they won't end up euthanized. The TNR clinic said, sure, we'll take 'em. This was the heretical moment. Because shelters did not return cats to the community. They held cats in hopes of finding them a warm, adoptive family. That was the fantasy, at least. The reality was that many, if not most, shelters were so overcrowded that most cats had no hope of being adopted. What if, instead, the cats were just treated and put back into the community? Because not all cats were house pets. Many were feral. Others were neighborhood cats, living outside and making a daily circuit among many different homes. They didn't need adoptive homes to survive. They were doing fine on their own. Maybe all they needed was to be vaccinated and sterilized. And then released. Hurley realized immediately the near magical power of the solution. It was a total holy sh moment, she said. It was just in a flash that I saw, oh, this entire system that we've been burdened by for 100 years. It was built on a fundamental premise that was never questioned until this guy who didn't know any better asked, could you just put them back? Return to field, the name for what Gujarlapudi had proposed, addressed so many problems at once. Once sterilized, the cats wouldn't contribute to overpopulation. Once vaccinated, they wouldn't spread disease. Once released from the shelter, they wouldn't clog up space and staff time. Meaning that the remaining cats were healthier and better cared for and more likely to be adopted. The shelter staffers were thrilled because they spent less time euthanizing cats and more time placing animals with families. The staff now had a little breathing room, Gujarlapudi said. They're thinking, wow, what else can we do? Best of all, those cats who weren't likely candidates for adoption, the ones who would have ended up euthanized, got to keep living. The obvious objection to this approach expressed by many animal control officers was, wait just a darn minute, the community is going to be overrun by cats. Hundreds of cats that previously were being caged or euthanized would now be set free. It would be pandemonium. But it didn't happen. According to Hurley, one reason was that spaying and neutering changes the cat's behavior. The cats just immediately become fat and lazy and calm themselves down, said Hurley. They become better citizens of the community. 4. So even if there were more cats around, they were cool cats, not troublemakers. Another factor at play here is more subtle and fascinating. Could return to field actually lower the total population of cats? That sounds absurd. How could you release more cats into a community and see the population numbers decline? It's like pouring water into a cup and seeing the volume of liquid decrease. The answer, according to Hurley, relates to the carrying capacity of the community. Think of carrying capacity like a food bank, the sum of all the food available to feed cats, ranging from mice and birds to bowls of kibbles left outside by animal lovers. That food bank is not infinite. It can support some finite number of animals. What happens when a cat, from among that finite number, is caged or euthanized? It opens up a spot at the buffet. If you took the cat away, but you left the food there, guaranteed there's some other cat there who's just going to have twice as much to eat, said Hurley. And then this is the crucial part. Those new diners at the buffet will have litters of kittens. That's how litter-bearing mammals work. They have offspring in direct proportion to how much food is available. But when the food bank is being gobbled up by spayed and neutered cats, it crowds out cats who otherwise might have had litters. Consider what happened in San Jose, California, where the local shelter became the first to adopt return to field based on Jacksonville's experience. The shelter returned about 10,000 cats to the field. Many skeptics feared an endless revolving door of cats coming in and out. But, no, the rate of cats coming into the shelter went down by 30%. V. Hurley knew she'd found her leverage point, something doable and worth doing. Something capable of moving the boulder of mass euthanasia. And she had located that leverage point by scanning the environment for bright spots. Notice the pattern of thought. What's the problem? Cats being killed in overcrowded shelters. Where is that problem not happening? I.e., what are the bright spots? There's a bright spot in Jacksonville, where the shelter director embraced the idea of return to field. Is that situation fundamentally different from other situations where it might be used? In other words, is there a reason to think it would only work in Jacksonville? No, the dynamics in the Jacksonville shelter were familiar and widespread. Okay then, let's replicate the bright spot. Hurley shared her findings with a group of shelter leaders in Northern California. Everyone in the room shared the goal of saving cats' lives. So Hurley laid out 5 strategies for accomplishing that goal, a key one being return to field. But she wasn't satisfied just giving a presentation. She wanted a commitment to do something. She pulled out a yellow legal pad and challenged the attendees to write down 3 bits of information: their name, their shelter, and the number of cats' lives that they would save in the next 6 months by adopting the bright spot practices she'd identified. When Hurley tallied up the number, she found the group had committed to save over 1,300 cats. The new practices were more successful than the shelter leaders had anticipated. One group, which had pledged to save the lives of 15 cats, found that after a year it had saved 900. Hurley realized she needed to think bigger. By late 2014, Hurley and her partner Levy were ready to unveil the Million Cat Challenge, an effort to scale the life-saving practices to shelters across the United States. The challenge aimed to save 1 million cats by the end of 2019. Not ambitious enough, as it turned out. The network of cat champions exceeded this goal easily. They had saved 1.1 million cats 1 full year ahead of schedule. By spring 2024, the number had rocketed up above 5 million cats. The campaign had been propelled by a bright spot that emerged almost by accident. It had been an idea from a new shelter director who didn't know enough to know that he shouldn't be suggesting it. An idea that ended up revolutionizing the field. That's the power of a well-chosen leverage point. In 2019, Hurley got an email from a shelter director who had joined the campaign. The email said, "We've run into a problem we've never had before. Our shelter has 49 full bottles of Fatal Plus which haven't been used and are at the end of their expiration date. How great is that problem to have?" Fatal Plus is the trade name for the euthanasia solution used in shelters. It wasn't needed anymore. I switch focuses on behavior change, while this book is aimed more at the systems level, operations and strategy. But they're definitely birds of a feather. The most direct intersection between the 2 books is the focus on bright spots. There's a full chapter on the topic in Switch, too, with all different material. Don't miss the story of child malnutrition in Vietnam, and a greater emphasis on the psychology of why we obsess more about problems than about successes. If you like this book, you're likely to like Switch, too. And if you don't like it, it's definitely Chip's fault. To notice there's a natural link between finding bright spots and then going and seeing the work. You identify a bright spot in the data, then you go study it. The reason the latter is so important is that bright spots, in this case, great client partners, don't always know why they are bright spots. They're just doing what seems right to them, just as the underperformers are doing what seems right to them, too. It takes observation to identify the practices that are making them excel. 3. The success was mostly but not exclusively due to the bright spots work. For example, there was the matter of the extreme underperformers. Ken Davis's attitude was, "If you're willing to learn, we want you on the team." But there were a few people who weren't willing to try. Davis recalled one woman who balked at the idea of trying to increase her number of client calls. She didn't think of herself as someone who served clients. She saw herself as more of a strategic planner. As Davis told me, if you want change, you've either got to change the people, or change the people. The strategic planner person had to find another job. For I'm not sure whether I would have the same response. By the way, I want to acknowledge that TNR has become controversial in the birder community because cats eat birds. That part, at least, is indisputable. So people who love birds say, you're releasing more cats, that's necessarily gonna mean more birds die. Hurley's counter-argument, as you read above, is that return to field shrinks the cat population. The birders don't buy that argument. Cats are a highly destructive invasive species that should not be allowed to live outdoors at all, was the stance articulated in one New York Times article. It's all complicated and mostly I want to stay out of this debate. Because I'm a dog person. Whirlwind Review, Chapter 3, Study the Bright Spots. 1. The third way to identify leverage points is to study the bright spots your most successful efforts. If you analyze what allowed you to succeed in those occasions, you can scale that success. 2. Averages are great for simple monitoring but terrible for diagnosis. If you want to spot leverage points, you must untangle averages. The Air Force found that there was no such thing as an average pilot. They needed cockpits that could be tailored to individual differences. 3. Often the way to unlock forward progress is to analyze your own best people or projects or performance. At Gartner, Ken Davis was facing a sharp drop in client retention. Rather than agonizing about what wasn't working, he studied his bright spot client partners. B. Davis was able to isolate specific practices they used, such as a defined daily process. Those practices were leverage points, and he could direct his whole team toward them. 4. You can analyze bright spots on any level: bright spots in your own life, bright spots in a team, bright spots among different departments in one organization, or even bright spots across different organizations doing similar kinds of work. Kate Hurley, in consulting with animal shelters, discovered a bright spot: the notion of return to field. It became a critical leverage point in saving the lives of millions of cats. 5. Finding leverage points can be a needle in a haystack hunt. Some leverage points might seem promising but prove impossible. But bright spots are different, you know. You can succeed, because you already have. Can you do it more? I learned about the U.S. Air Force's cockpit study from Todd Rose's fascinating book The End of Average. Rose, who headed the Mind, Brain, and Education program at Harvard, breaks down the myth of measuring individuals against the average in schools and at work. He's really good at showing how there are usually multiple pathways to success: the 3 approaches children take when learning to read, the 7 distinct routes to career success, and others. For a more psychological take on change, including a closer look at the power of bright spots thinking, check out Switch, by my brother Chip and me. For even more on bright spots, especially for social sector work, see The Power of Positive Deviance by Richard Pascal, Jerry Sternin, and Monique Sternin. Positive deviance equals bright spots thinking. If you're a cat person or simply interested in learning more about how a pair of vets managed to save millions of cats, check out the Unleashing Social Change podcast episode with Kate Hurley as a guest. For a master class on how Hurley approached fixes for overcrowding in shelters, watch her virtual lecture hosted by the San Diego Humane Society. Or, to learn more about the 5 life-saving strategies used in the Million Cat Challenge, check out the resources section of the campaign's website. As a teaser, one strategy was managed admission, which was basically a way of relieving bottleneck, or target the constraint. You can find leverage points by assessing the number 1 force that is holding you back. Target the constraint. 1. One night during the pandemic, I was sent to Chick-fil-A to grab dinner for the family. What I saw when I arrived was deflating, a seemingly endless line of cars for the drive-thru, snaking chaotically through the parking lot and twisting out onto the road. I panicked. I hate lines. This was a half-hour wait, minimum. I started fabricating wife-worthy excuses in my head. Oh, sorry, honey, there was a road closed. So naturally I left the car and jogged the rest of the way, but it turns out they'd run out of chicken. Let's order pizza? Then I rallied myself. No, come on, buck up, I thought. I stared at the 50-ish cars ahead of me. Be a good dad. After one final moment of desperate mental bargaining, what if I just offered my daughters extra screen time in lieu of dinner? I accepted my fate. I rolled forward and entered the line. Later I found that my experience was borne out in cold, hard data. QSR magazine published in 2023 a scorecard of how long it took, on average, for customers to get through a drive-thru line at 10 major franchises. Check out where Chick-fil-A landed. Dead last. You'd get through the line at Taco Bell about 2.5 minutes faster. But let's get back to my predicament. Once I joined the line, something happened that tragically interrupted my sulking. I noticed that the line was moving almost constantly. It crept forward, steadily, like an automatic car wash. I flipped from irritated to fascinated. This was the most operationally sophisticated drive-through I'd ever seen. It ran like clockwork. Clockwork. By the time I emerged from the line, nuggets in the passenger seat, I promised myself I'd investigate the story. It had taken less than 10 minutes to get 50 cars through the line. This aspect of my experience, too, was reflected in a chart published by QSR. The previous chart showed the average time to get through the line. This one shows the average number of cars in the line. Note the Chick-fil-A number relative to its peers. So the data is saying, yes, it's taking a while to get through the line at Chick-fil-A, but that's because there are a bunch of cars in line. The chain's speed, in terms of cars served per hour, is actually the best in the country. And, as it turns out, my local Chick-fil-A, Roxborough Road in Durham, North Carolina, is one of the top 5 highest performing drive-thrus in the entire chain. At its best, it has served 400 cars in an hour. That's a car every 9 seconds. Your kids could get through college before Hardee's would finish 400 cars. My local nugget source is basically the Usain Bolt of drive-thrus. But it wasn't always that way. In the beginning, it was a normal Chick-fil-A with a normal drive-thru. Then, it made a series of critical changes over the years, one after another, that led to the present-day results. Those changes were guided by a simple idea, one that you can use to boost your own change efforts. It's the idea of targeting the constraint, and it's the fourth of 5 methods you can use to identify leverage points. What's the constraint? It's the limiting factor. It's the number one force that is holding you back from doing your work better or on a greater scale. I'm using constraint as a synonym for bottleneck. The two terms are similar, but I like the former because it seems broader and lacks the factory/operations connotations of bottleneck. 2N In your search for leverage points, you are looking for candidates that target the constraint that erode the obstacles standing in the way. Chick-fil-A's steady progress over the years was fueled by continuous attention to constraints. Drive-through is all about flow, said Tony Fernandez, the owner/operator of the Chick-fil-A at Roxborough Road. It's about managing the bottlenecks. A key early leverage point was the embrace of face-to-face ordering, meaning that in the drive-through lanes outside the restaurant, a human being stands next to your car and takes your order. It was a triple win. First, it's faster. The traditional menu board dazzles and delays customers. But with somebody standing at your window, you make quicker decisions. Second, pushing the order takers upstream into the parking lot increased the amount of time the kitchen had to produce the meals, thus increasing the odds your food would be ready right when your car arrived at the window. 3. Third, and perhaps most important, untethering the operations from the menu board allowed Chick-fil-A to scale. A typical fast food franchise might be stuck with one menu board, or maybe 2 if it's busy. But there's no natural limit on parking lot attendance. In 2024, my Chick-fil-A would routinely have 4 or 5 people taking orders simultaneously. In the early days, before tablet computers became commonplace, the parking lot attendants would call in orders to the kitchen via cell phones. Then, the constraint shifted to the checkout process, so they wheeled out the cash register to the parking lot using a super long cable. As technology advanced, eventually, the order takers could accept payment, too. Wireless tablets made it easy. Periodically, the bottleneck would shift to the kitchen team, who make the food, or to meal assembly, the team who bundle and bag your order. More staffers would be brought on duty to relieve the constraint. One day, one of Fernandez's lieutenants, Jacob Franks, and Jacob's brother, Austin, flew a drone above the franchise to watch the line go and see the work. Watching the video footage, they noticed that when the line spilled out onto the street, cars tended to abandon it. I could relate. That insight sparked an idea for another leverage point called closing the gaps, which meant that while your order was being taken, you were encouraged to keep your car creeping forward, with the order taker walking alongside you as You discussed nuggets and sauces. That forward movement let them shrink the space between cars, which accommodated more cars in the lot, which reduced the chance that the line would overflow onto the street, which prevented potential customers from bailing. Closing the gaps had a psychological payoff as compelling as the operational one. Fernandez and his team learned that what drove customer satisfaction was not necessarily minimizing the wait time. It was the feeling of progress. That steadily creeping 50-car line at Chick-fil-A, which takes 7 minutes to complete, is actually preferable to idling in the 5-minute line behind 2 cars at Taco Bell. It's less painful. Uncanny, isn't it, how this mirrors the progress principle from the introduction? The feeling of progress is psychologically precious. Keep in mind that, even as you improve your operations, the constraint never goes away. As one area gets better, the constraint shifts elsewhere. When I first met Fernandez, the active constraint in the system was the beverage cockpit. The laws of physics would simply not allow the team to pour the drinks into the cups quickly enough to keep up with the line. They needed more drink dispensers, but there wasn't room, so they had to wait for an expensive renovation that more than doubled the capacity of the beverage cockpit. By mid-2024, the constraint was back to meal assembly. They're working on it. The new goal was an unprecedented 500 car hour. Fernandez joked that, someday, he'll hire quarterbacks to work the drive-through window, so cars can just roll by without stopping, their food thrown through the window in a perfect spiral. 2. What's counterintuitive about constraints is that even smart-seeming investments can be worthless at improving the operations of a system if they don't address the constraint. Here's a simple example. Let's say you're running a donut stand at a county fair. One person cooks the donuts, which takes 60 seconds, and the other person takes the orders, which takes 90 seconds. The stand is busy all day, with a long line of customers waiting. Imagine that a salesman approaches you after hours with a special donut fryer. That will cut your cook time in half, from 60 seconds to 30 seconds. It's expensive, but that's a huge improvement. The fryer is a solid leverage point. You should buy it, right? No. Because if you think of the overall system, you're working on a rhythm of 90 seconds per customer. Every 90 seconds, a happy customer walks away with donuts. And the gate on your system performance, the bottleneck is the ordering process. So if you could cook donuts in 30 seconds instead of 60, the system as a whole wouldn't get any faster. Not 1 second. You wouldn't serve any more customers. Your cook would just have a minute of idle time in between every customer checkout. So the fancy fryer is not a leverage point because it will not speed up your operations. To fight the constraint, you should hire another order taker. With 2 order takers going, you'll be checking out 1 customer on average every 45 seconds. Which means that now the constraint flips to the donut cooking, which takes 60. So now it's time to call the donut fryer salesman. Buy it. That lets you cook donuts every 30 seconds, which means the constraint flips back to ordering. If you hire a third order taker, 3 people taking orders at 90 seconds apiece means a system average of 30 seconds, then, presto, you've got a lightning fast system that's harmonized at 30 seconds per order. You've tripled your speed. 4. You could theoretically keep running this game plan forever, whittling the time down, down, down. But eventually you'll run out of customers. You'll have a small army of bored staffers sitting around, checking their phones. The constraint flips to marketing. So, in the world of operations, the notion of a constraint is rigid, mathematical. In other contexts, the constraint may be less scientific. But it's still relevant. Let's zoom far away from fast food. Away from scale, away from speed. Let's consider the home care business, in which customers hire caregivers to attend to their, in most cases, very old relatives. The caregivers are not trained medical personnel, rather, they help with the daily activities of life, bathing, shopping, cleaning, cooking. They also provide companionship. Often, the people they care for live alone. So this is a business that's personal, complicated, human, compassionate, messy, difficult. The anti-factory. But it still has a constraint. In the post-pandemic era, the constraint on the growth of most home care businesses was labor, finding and keeping good people. It's hard to attract good people when the job demands intense, taxing work. But the pay is close to minimum wage. Home care leaders could pay their staffers a generous wage, say, $30 an hour. But then most of their business would evaporate, because their customers are regular folks paying out of pocket for their own relatives to receive care. For most non-rich people, it's a massive financial burden. There's just not much room to budge on wages. So how do you hire extremely capable and dependable people for a subpar wage? Mostly, you don't. Workers cycle in and out of home care constantly. The median turnover rate in the industry is about 65%, meaning that 2 out of every 3 workers are gone within a year. Churn rates above 100% are not uncommon. So that's your constraint. You can't grow because it's really hard to find more staffers who will work reliably at the wages you can afford to pay. Laura Shoddy-Bruin, the executive director of Norwood Seniors Network, decided to aim her efforts squarely at that constraint. She was appalled by the high churn norms of the industry. It was embarrassing. It was not efficient. She said, "I wanted people to like where they worked. I wanted them to be happy." To escape the endless churn cycle, she made 2 key changes. Norwood got pickier about whom it hired, and it fought harder to keep those chosen few. That required a substantial upfront investment building a pipeline of candidates and constructing a set of filters to identify the absolute best employees. Each filter detailed questionnaires, structured interviews, background screenings. A rigorous pre-orientation process involves a meaningful drop-off rate. The interview, for instance, is designed to weed out people who had the wrong instincts for home care work. "It's amazing what people will say," said Shoddy-Bruin. One scenario she offers sometimes is, imagine that you're working with an older woman who has dementia and she's getting angry at you and yelling. What would you do? Some candidates, Shoddy-Bruin said, will say, "Well, I'd walk right out the door." When you're caring for somebody, you can't just walk out the door, she said. Some candidates have shown up for Zoom interviews while driving their car. One person logged in while taking a bath. These people were not hired. The pre-orientation process, too, is burdensome, involving a physical and a drug test, among other steps. All of which must be delivered on a strict deadline. If they're late on things like that, we don't even bother hiring them, said Shoddy-Bruin. If they can't get the things done on time, are they not going to show up to a shift? We value reliability. Only 3% or so of Norwood's applicants are hired. They're the cream of the crop and are often caregivers at heart. Once hired, Norwood wants to keep them. The firm tries to carefully match caregivers with clients, but the caregiver has a veto if the fit doesn't seem right. The match is critical, since the relationships can last for years. "We have a client right now who smokes weed and drinks all day," said Shoddy-Bruin. "That's all he does. He's retired and this is how he wants to spend his retirement. He is not aggressive. He's not hurtful or nasty. He just doesn't give a hoot about anything. But without us there, he won't eat or shower. So we help him, remind him to do those things. And we take him places. Because he does not get in the car anymore, thank goodness. One of the caregivers I have with him is just as old as he is, very laid back. And they work perfectly together." Norwood built a mentoring program that matches new hires with more experienced staffers. "Home care can be very isolating for new workers," said Shoddy-Bruin. "I wanted them to feel connected. Now, they're contacted by a peer on their first day. And then again on the 30, 60, and 90-day milestones. The program gives them someone to talk to, someone who's not a boss. Someone who can relate to the countless daily hardships of caregiving." At Chick-fil-A, the constraint bobbed around from ordering to payment to baggers to beverages and so on. As the constraint shifted, so did the leverage point, the part of the system where applying force could permit Disproportionate progress. At Norwood, by contrast, the constraint holds rock steady, and so does its strategy. The constraint is labor quality and retention all day, every day. So the firm's leaders have identified leverage points to relieve that constraint: a tough hiring process and a mentorship program and careful attention to matching the right caregiver with the right client. All this attention to retention has paid off. Caregivers stay with them. Norwood is now consistently below 30% churn, which is rare in the industry. And it's no mystery why the firm has had that success. It thoughtfully and consistently applied resources to relieving the constraint. 3. Constraints are contingent on a goal. If you were to ask, what's the constraint? At my kid's school, that question doesn't compute. Constraint on what? The constraint on smaller class sizes might be a lack of teachers or classroom space. The constraint on improving the student experience might be the lack of interactive lessons in classrooms, reminiscent of the Shadow a Student story in Chapter 1. Chick-fil-A found its constraint in the context of improving the flow of its drive-through. Norwood found its constraint in the context of growing the business. How do you find the constraint for the goal you've identified? Often the "go and see the work" advice from Chapter 1 will do the trick. When you observe how the work happens, you'll naturally spot blockages. Where are there pileups or delays? Or try asking yourself this question: if you were allowed to hire one person to help you achieve your goal, what would that person's role be? The role you identify might well be the epicenter of the constraint. Once you realize this, you might be able to mitigate the constraint even if you can't actually hire someone. Even individuals have constraints. The couples therapist Laura Heck deals constantly with unhappy fighting couples, and it's her job to identify what's holding them back and find some way to reverse the bad feelings. What's something that's small enough for them to embrace immediately but also big enough to matter? What could possibly serve as a leverage point in a failing marriage? Heck frequently recommends to her clients an activity called sticky note appreciations. Here's how it works: you keep a sticky notepad and a pen right by the toothbrush holder in the bathroom. Then, while you brush your teeth, you're thinking about something positive you noticed about your partner, something you appreciated. You write it on a sticky note and leave it on the mirror for them to find. Thanks for making time to talk college stuff with Lucas. You're so good with him. I'm hoping to create an attitude of gratitude in their relationship where they're creating this desire to look for the positives, said Heck. What's going right in the relationship? What do you love and appreciate about your partner? Because whatever we look for, we're going to find. This activity is a reliable client favorite. And it's easy to understand why. People love finding those notes of appreciation twice a day. Except that Heck said that those little bursts of joy are not really the point. It might feel really good to receive a sticky note from your partner, but that's not actually the purpose of this, she said. The purpose is to create a habit of mind where you're scanning for the positives. And it gets easier with time. So the more you start to tune into what do I appreciate? What do I admire? What do I respect? The easier it becomes. This is ingenious. As a therapist, almost everything is out of your control: the couple's past, their personalities, their emotions, their jobs, and finances and kids. Not to mention that you might see them for only 1 hour in a week. The other 167 hours are out of your jurisdiction. To repeat a riff from the introduction, when you're facing a big challenge, you can't change everything. You can't change most things. You can't even change a respectable fraction of things. But, with a bit of prodding and catalyzing, you can help change something. For Heck, that something was to create a habit of mind where you're scanning for the positives. That is a direct response to the key constraint in the couple's lives, the inability to see anything positive about their partners. They're not wearing rose-colored glasses, they're wearing jackass-colored glasses. The sticky note appreciations activity isn't a magic trick. It doesn't instantly solve a couple's problems. But it helps. It's a leverage point. For struggling couples who are hanging on to frayed hopes that it's possible to get back to where they once were, it's a chance to see the boulder budge. For Because constraints make sense only in the context of goals, a logical corollary is that when you shift your goal, the constraint shifts too. Think about the veterans' loan forgiveness example from Chapter 2. In the beginning, when veterans had to apply for forgiveness, the constraint was reducing the friction on applications. But then came the epiphany, hey, let's just proactively forgive those loans. That's a new goal. And as a result, the constraint shifted to something more like getting permission from different government agencies to compare databases so that we can figure out whose loans should be forgiven. Targeting that constraint rather than the original one makes a huge difference in how you direct your time and resources. Similarly, with the Million Cat Challenge, the adoption of the return to field practice amounted to a brand new goal for shelters. If your goal is to shelter cats in hopes of getting them adopted, and you're hopelessly overcrowded, your constraint might be the lack of space or the lack of families receptive to adoption. After committing to return to field, though, the constraint might shift to something more like making sure there is enough surgical capacity to handle all the spaying and neutering that's necessary. When you know where you're headed and understand what's keeping you from getting there, you can overcome that constraint and chart a better path forward. If you're viewing this as an ebook, there's an in-app purchase that allows you to remove all of these puns. 2. For readers intrigued by the notion of constraints, there's a classic business book you should immediately order called The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt and Jeff Cox. It explains the theory of constraints via a fictionalized account of a failing factory and a failing marriage. It's an odd and compelling book, and there's a reason it has sold more than 10 million copies. 3. Weirdly, in drive-through lingo, they call the window where you get your food the door. I refuse to be complicit in this usage. 4. Have I created this whole thought experiment about donuts so that my visits to Krispy Kreme will be tax deductible? Perhaps. Might save me some dough. Whirlwind Review, Chapter 4, Target the Constraint. 1. The fourth way to identify leverage points is to target the constraint, or bottleneck the number one thing holding you back from your goal. Having identified the constraint, you can spot ideas for easing it. At the Chick-fil-A on Roxborough Road, the drive-thru could serve a car every 9 seconds. They achieved that level of performance by targeting the bottlenecks systematically. 2. Constraints don't go away. When you relieve one constraint, you improve the system, and another constraint takes its place. There's always a constraint. 3. Investments that aren't directed at the constraint might do nothing to improve the system as a whole. In the donut shop example, buying a new fryer would let you cook donuts faster, but that wouldn't help anything because the constraint, at the beginning, was the ordering step. 4. Constraints can be clear-cut in operations-intensive environments. But every organization faces constraints, even if they aren't as simple to quantify. In Norwood's home care business, the constraint was finding trustworthy labor who would work for the wages the client could provide. To relieve that constraint, the firm hired more selectively and invested in retention and employee satisfaction. Even individuals have constraints. In Laura Heck's couples therapy practice, the key constraint was viewing your partner positively. So she prescribed the sticky note appreciations activity. 5. Constraints only make sense in the context of goals. If you shift the goal, the constraint will move, too. In the Million Cat Challenge, shelters began to embrace the concept of return to field. That, in turn, shifted the constraint to the availability of surgical capacity for spaying and neutering. 6. When you understand deeply what is holding you back, you can spot possible leverage points that will allow you to shrink the obstacle and permit forward progress. For more on the theory of constraints, I'm not sure whether anything can top the classic 1984 business book The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt and Jeff Cox. It offers practical examples and lessons on how to evaluate an entire system versus its individual components, as well as insights on organizational culture, leadership, and teamwork. And did I mention it's a novel? Also, 24 years after The Goal, Goldratt applied his philosophy of constraints to life more broadly through a conversation with his daughter, Efrat, in the book The Choice. For a practical, constraint-based approach to personal change, I'd recommend How to Change by Katie Milkman. She described her approach: change comes most readily when you understand what's standing between you and success and tailor your solution to that roadblock. If sticky note appreciations struck a chord, you can hear more from Laura Heck on my podcast, What It's Like to Be. She gives us a peek into life as a couples therapist. From the power of mystery dates to the rampant misuse of the word narcissism. And finally, as a palate cleanser, enjoy this comedic take on what happened. 5. Map the system. You can find leverage points by rising above the silos to spot hidden levers. Map the system. 1. In 2018, two friends and colleagues, Jordy Bracken and Mike Goldstein, started questioning one of their longest-held beliefs. The belief went like this: if students from low-income families could successfully graduate from college, then that degree would be their ticket to a financially secure future. Both friends had a stake in this belief. Bracken was a charter school administrator, and Goldstein was the founder of a college prep charter school for low-income kids. But both of them were starting to have doubts. As I saw a lot of my students enter the workforce, I just started to get this creeping feeling that actually maybe the degree wasn't really helping them get jobs that were moving them out of poverty, said Bracken. It wasn't the stuff of the American dream. A Bain & Company analysis of college graduates from charter schools confirmed Bracken's intuition. Only half of those graduates were earning more than $40,000 per year, and 40% of them were holding jobs that did not require a bachelor's degree. Goldstein said, "We started realizing, we've got a problem here because our whole theory of change is not what we had hoped." Bracken and Goldstein began to brainstorm about possible interventions that would help these students. Their students freeze there for a moment. They were looking, in short, for a leverage point. It was hard to conceive of a viable candidate, because the institutions and forces involved were so huge: families, schools, poverty, employers. A particular student might spend 4 years in a charter school, then 4 years in college, then start applying for jobs. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. So if the system depicted here was not delivering good jobs for graduating students, what could you potentially change? Could you do something in high school? That would be an easy place to experiment for Bracken and Goldstein, since they were involved in charter high schools. But what kind of career prep, taught to a 16-year-old, would realistically arm them for success so many years later? Don't forget, 6 years from now, to write a really personalized cover letter. What about college? Maybe, but as a charter school administrator, you have no control over college. It seems like a stretch to think you could influence the curriculum being taught. What about the career centers in college, though? These groups exist for the sole purpose of helping college students get good jobs, a seemingly perfect spot for an intervention. Intrigued, Bracken and Goldstein began to investigate how career centers operated. Go and see the work. What they learned was not encouraging. In summarizing what they had observed, Goldstein and Bracken channeled the voice of a fictional career counselor who had been freed to speak the hard, unfiltered truth to students. Our career office is not set up to get you a job. We offer you mild edits on your resume, which helps your job search perhaps 3%. We give you a handout that tells you to network, but it's not obvious how to actually do this. We refer you to the Handshake online platform, which you will likely find frustrating to use. We may organize some career fairs, where you'll wander from table to table, confused about what to say or ask. Beyond that, we play dodgeball. You try to get our one-to-one help to make some introductions for you, genuine connections to real jobs, and we try to dodge you because we don't actually have many connections in that way. We typically see any senior once or twice, then by carefully analyzing the experience of students through schools and career centers, Bracken and Goldstein were mapping the system, which is the fifth and final way to identify a leverage point. Sometimes, to find a leverage point, we need to zoom out and see the big picture. Study how all the pieces fit together. Once we understand the system as a whole, we can find the hidden levers. That's a term used by Stephen Hamburg of the Environmental Defense Fund, whom we'll meet later in the chapter. Where were the hidden levers in a student's hunt for a good job? Bracken and Goldstein wondered whether there was something they could do outside school. During the job search itself, they zoomed in on that part of the map because both of them had been inspired by the success of high-dosage math tutoring, in which students received one-to-one instruction in courses where they were struggling. The intense, personal, highly customized approach often seemed to unlock success in a way that normal schooling could not. They hatched the idea of high-dosage career counseling, an intensive period of coaching for young college graduates, with the goal of yielding a job paying at least $10,000 per year more than the graduates were currently making. They ballparked it as 30 hours of one-to-one coaching over a 3-month period. It would be both a higher quantity and higher quality of assistance than students could get from any career office. Bracken agreed to coach a few clients as an experiment, offering the help pro bono to lower the barrier for potential clients. He and Goldstein started looking for people who might be good candidates. One of Bracken's first clients was Faith Carter. After college, Carter did administrative work for a title company, making $26,000 a year. Her mom had helped her get the job. Carter had applied for about 40 other jobs but received no callbacks. She was an Ivy League graduate. Another early client, Michael DeLeon, worked for a nonprofit, and he was eager to find a role with more responsibility and better pay. He had started applying for other jobs here and there, maybe once a month. But nothing ever landed. It was starting to get demoralizing. It was Bracken's job to figure out why both of them were striking out. The first order of business was like, "Tell me exactly what you've been doing," Bracken said. "And the whole time I'm trying to diagnose where they've gone wrong, or where they're stuck, or where they've had this misconception about how the job search works." Bracken found that Faith Carter had been applying for director-level positions that required years of experience that she didn't have. He helped her calibrate. With DeLeon, interview practice was the key. "I used to speak a mile a minute in every conversation," DeLeon said. "And so something I had to really practice was just slowing down. Also being more concise. I'm a good rambler." For both of them, Bracken's guidance was a revelation, because they'd never received the feedback they needed to improve. "I was shooting all these shots into the air, but nothing was coming back," said Carter. "No is an answer, but nevertheless it still gives me nothing to work with. I don't know if they're declining me because I don't have enough experience, or I'm not the right fit, or whatever." With Bracken's coaching, they started applying for the right jobs on a regular rhythm. A few months into their work, DeLeon applied for a job as an assistant director of admissions at Haverford College. "I would have never even applied for this role if it wasn't for Jordy Bracken," he said. "No one's going to hire me to be an assistant director." To his surprise, he was invited to interview. So Bracken arranged a series of mock interviews so DeLeon could practice. When the day came to interview with Haverford, he was ready, and he endured the Zoom gauntlet of 5 successive interviews. He felt great about how he'd done. But he didn't get the job. It was a tough blow to absorb. Then, 6 weeks later, the Dean of Admissions reached out to him. The department had found the funds to create a new role specifically for him. "They connected to me through the interview process and they didn't want to lose me," said DeLeon. "They wanted me on the team. I was in shock." He took the job. It paid $11,000 more than his prior role. Meanwhile, Faith had applied for and landed a role at a private school that paid $20,000 more. The high-dosage career counseling was working. And it continued to work. All of Bracken's first 30 clients got a better job within a matter of months, with a median gain of $11,000 per year. Every single one. "I think a key to Jordy Bracken's success has been that people need somebody to untangle where they're stuck," said Goldstein. "You find the one thing in 20 in a particular situation that's blocking them. And you can't do that with a formulaic response. Target the constraint. With high-dosage career counseling, Bracken and Goldstein had found a viable leverage point, a 30-hour booster engine that yielded meaningful results. Before their efforts, it wasn't obvious to anyone that such a service could exist or that it could work. It was outside the scope of high schools. It was foreign to career centers. It was upstream of employers. To find the leverage point, someone had to zoom out and map the system. 2. The key move in mapping the system is to ascend above the silos, the individual units or departments within a larger organization, or across multiple organizations in the same field. Silos are the inevitable but regrettable consequence of a mission that's too big to conquer holistically. You can't run modern-day Microsoft out of a garage, informally, over pizza and beer. You must break it into 10,000 pieces, carved up by function and product and geography. Each team gains ownership of one piece of the puzzle. That's the only sane approach to managing a system with massive complexity. Inevitably, though, team members start to worry more about their piece than the entire puzzle. The silo comes to overshadow the whole. Why? Because their work is in the silo. Their friends are in the silo. Their performance is measured within the silo, and their incentives are tied to the silo's results. That's why mapping the system works best when it spans silos, because no one other than the top executives of an organization is paying attention to the whole. One tried and true method for transcending silos is to follow the path of a key customer or constituent. For, say, a software business, you might map the journey by which a customer discovers you, signs a contract, gets on board, and subsequently seeks support. Journey mapping is a common term of art. Here, a team at the University of Iowa Hospital and Clinics, UIHC, mapped the flow of patients through the radiology department. The goal of the team's work was to eliminate the 2-week wait time for patients to receive CT scans. For many of the people involved, it was the first time they'd been invited to see the big picture. In healthcare, sometimes people work in silos, said James Buhensky, one of the leaders of the improvement process at the clinic. You've got the scanning activity, you've got X-ray activities, you've got other things, and they all work in their own separate areas. They don't understand each other's processes. The team traced the patient's experience from when they arrived at the clinic to when they left. When the team saw the whole, they noticed some obvious flaws. One involved contrast dye, the chalky solution that patients are asked to drink before receiving a CT scan. The contrast shows up white on the scans, which can help the radiologist distinguish organs and also spot problems. At UIHC, the first nurse who met with the patient supplied the contrast. After the patient guzzled it, things would come to a halt for an hour while the liquid made its way through the patient's GI tract. The team wondered, why are we waiting so long to start the clock on the contrast? It was a costly delay. The nurses had always been the ones to administer it, but, as Buhensky said, nobody seemed to know why. It was just a drink. No real medical complexity involved. So a few days into the sprint, they bought a refrigerator for the reception area, and now when patients checked in for a scan, the receptionist could just hand them a bottle of contrast. The time savings were huge for patient and clinic alike, and it required a new fridge. This, buying a new fridge, type solution is exactly the kind of idea that will not emerge within silos. The receptionist can show up every day and manage his or her domain exquisitely, checking in patients efficiently and politely, but it will never once occur to them to say, hey, I should be the person administering contrast. Nor will it occur to the nurses, hey, this medical seeming thing I've been handling since time immemorial is probably best turfed to the receptionist. Only with the systems level view can you hope to unlock an improvement like this one. During the sprint, the working team mapped not only the way patients flowed through the clinic but also their own movements within the space. They observed the clinic's technologists and created spaghetti charts, which use noodleish lines to represent the movements of people over time. Here's a spaghetti chart for one particular tech. As you can see, there were some long walks involved. The technologist had been escorting patients from reception to the prep rooms. But from the system's view, it made more sense to let the tech stay focused on CT scanning work. Someone else could do the chaperoning. After the team redesigned the workflow, the technologists' new spaghetti chart looked like this: a 91% reduction in necessary steps. We'll encounter more of this thinking about reducing waste ahead in Chapter 7. On the strength of such improvisations and innovations, the team successfully overhauled the clinic's operations. After the reset, the clinic was able to see 84 patients daily, up from the previous norm of 64. Extrapolating those results annually, Bohensky and his colleagues wrote that more than 3,000 additional CT cases could be handled annually, increasing net revenue by approximately $750,000. The 2-week wait time for patients to receive a scan was eliminated. Folks, this took 5 days. 3. The second crucial component of mapping the system, in addition to spanning silos, is challenging assumptions. As you come to understand how the different parts of a system interact, you'll need to start asking incisive questions. Why do we do it that way? Is there a better way? Mike Goldstein and Jordy Bracken asked, what if we snapped some high-dosage career tutoring into the ecosystem? Would that burst of tailored assistance be enough to matter given the massive forces at play? Or recall that in the Million Cat Challenge story, a giant leap forward was triggered when the Jacksonville shelter director asked, hey, what if we just trap, neuter, and release some of these healthy cats that are in our overcrowded shelter? The biggest challenge you have in thinking about systems is becoming aware of your assumptions, because the assumptions almost always drive how you view the system, said Stephen Hamburg, the chief scientist at the Environmental Defense Fund, EDF. We will close this section of the book by studying the work of Hamburg and his colleagues to find a leverage point in perhaps the world's single most complex arena of action, the effort to slow down climate change. In previous chapters, we've explored how people found leverage points in small systems, a struggling married couple, and in larger ones, the effort to forgive loans for disabled veterans. Now, we'll see how the same logic applies even on a global scale. One of Hamburg's early assumption questioning moments involved, of all things, a van. As a professor at Brown University, his job before the EDF, he'd used a natural gas-powered van to shuttle his forest ecology students to field sites every week. It was supposed to provide a cleaner, more efficient option than a gasoline-powered van. But did it, really? Natural gas had been billed as the perfect fuel to bridge humanity as it transitioned from dirty energy, coal, oil, to clean energy, solar, wind. Natural gas burns significantly cleaner than coal and oil. But Hamburg didn't think it was so simple. Taking the van as an example, we really didn't know if driving a natural gas van was the environmentally better thing to do, said Hamburg. None of the calculations included methane emissions. Note, methane makes up about 97% of natural gas, so many people use the terms interchangeably. Why weren't methane emissions taken more seriously? In the world of climate change, where scientists were constantly computing the effects of different changes on the environment, researchers had settled on the convention of computing things on a 100-year timeline. The convention was a compromise. A century was a long enough period to study the cumulative effects of carbon emissions, but short enough that it stayed relevant to present-day leaders. On this 100-year time frame, methane didn't matter, because it was short-lived. Methane sticks around in the atmosphere only for about a decade. CO2 can last for millennia. That's why CO2 was the dominant, and often exclusive, focus of climate change discussions, and why you hear about carbon footprints but never methane footprints. Hamburg realized that the assumption was problematic. Even though methane didn't endure for 100 years, that didn't mean it was irrelevant on a 100-year time frame. Because during its short life, it packed a nasty punch. Because of its unique molecular structure, methane can trap up to 80 times more heat than other greenhouse gases, so even a small increase could have an outsized impact on how much the planet warms, and how quickly. So, in a way, the natural gas van became the perfect symbol of the folly of the time frame assumption. Because when Hamburg did some basic math, he came to a startling conclusion: yes, over a 100-year time frame, driving a natural gas powered van was better for the environment. But it was a net negative for the first 85 of those years. It turned positive only during the last 15 years. So the van was bad for him. It was bad for his children. The van was bad for his children's children. But maybe one day his great-grandchildren could eke out some small benefit. Hamburg came to realize that the world was facing two climate crises: the carbon dioxide problem, the dominant topic of discussion, and now a methane emissions problem, too. You couldn't overlook either one. We need to solve both, Hamburg realized. It's not an or, it's an and. In mapping the system, Hamburg had discovered something unexpected and vital. There was a hidden lever, reducing methane emissions and doing it quickly and dramatically. There are natural sources of methane emissions, such as wetlands. Those would be hard to contain. But other sources of emissions were preventable, such as leaks from the wells used to capture natural gas, as well as from the pipes used to transport it. To reduce methane emissions, those leaks would have to be located and plugged. That was no easy mission, though, since methane is odorless and colorless. It's true that you can smell gas from your furnace or stove, but that's only because gas companies for safety reasons have added a chemical that smells like sulfur. With infrared cameras, though, leaks could be spotted. Once a leak was identified, fixing it wasn't rocket science, it was plumbing. Better yet, for the energy companies involved, the leaks represented lost revenue. If natural gas escapes into the atmosphere, you can't sell it, which gave them a financial incentive, as well as a moral one, to take leaks seriously. This financial incentive illustrates, once again, the importance of finding leverage points that are both worth doing and doable. It would be immensely valuable to our great-grandchildren's future if all current citizens would switch immediately to a vegan diet. That is worth doing from a climate change perspective. But it's also very, very far from doable. By contrast, reducing methane was both environmentally significant and of value to the exact industry doing the polluting. At EDF, Hamburg and his colleagues, along with researchers from universities and the energy industry, expanded the hunt for leaks. What they learned, in some cases, was outright alarming. In the Permian Basin in West Texas, for example, the second largest natural gas area in the United States, methane was leaking at a rate 60% higher than the EPA's estimates. At that level of leaking, natural gas was worse for the planet than coal. But Hamburg and his colleagues found bright spots, too. Early on, researchers scanned and inspected the Barnett natural gas field in central Texas. 1/3 of the sites had either minuscule methane leaks or none at all. A buttoned-up system was possible, after all. Study the bright spots. Even as the leak chasers learned more and more about the system, their sense of dissatisfaction grew. The studies give us snapshots, but they don't give us the comprehensive view, Hamburg said. They don't give us the movie. We've never had the data to answer three basic questions: where are the emissions? How much are the emissions? And how are they changing over time? But answering these questions on a global level seemed a far-fetched aspiration. Only an innovation worthy of science fiction could hope to provide that level of detail. Then, the EDF team proceeded to cook up an innovation worthy of science fiction. They hatched a plan to launch a methane tracking satellite into space. From orbit, using special cameras, the satellite could compile a real-time portrait of nearly every leak on the planet. On March 4, 2024, that satellite Methane SAT was launched aboard a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. It will provide real-time leverage points. Where are the biggest leaks? What would it take to plug them? Who has an incentive to do the plugging? It's an environmental dream. The goal is to cut 45% of methane emissions within a few years, which is the carbon footprint equivalent of shuttering 1/3 of all coal plants in the world. The satellite's price tag is $90 million. But if it can help to minimize the worst effects of the coming storms, fires, floods, and droughts, it will be a bargain and a leverage point for the ages. To get real for a moment, though, your great-grandchildren are definitely not going to see a benefit to driving your hand-me-down 85-year-old van. Whirlwind Review, Chapter 5, Map the System. 1. The fifth and final way to identify leverage points is to map the system. Zoom out to see the big picture. You're hunting for the hidden levers in the system. In trying to help low-income college graduates get better jobs, Mike Goldstein and Geordie Bracken saw that one promising place to intervene was during the job search itself, as opposed to during formal education. Their idea for high-dosage career counseling proved incredibly effective for all of their early clients. 2. Mapping the system requires ascending above the silos both within and across organizations. 3. One reliable tool for mapping the system is to follow the journey of a customer, or patient or student, as they intersect different silos. By following the patient journey through the radiology clinic, the clinic's staffers were able to spot valuable leverage points, such as having the receptionist administer contrast upon check-in. 4. The second critical aspect of mapping the system, in addition to rising above silos, is the need to challenge assumptions. According to EDF's Stephen Hamburg, the assumptions always drive how you view the system. There was a key assumption that had deterred environmental leaders from focusing on methane. Because of its uniquely short life, it really didn't matter in the long run. By rethinking these assumptions, Hamburg and the EDF uncovered a hidden lever in the world of climate change, the opportunity to reduce methane emissions quickly. 5. By studying the way systems function and the relationships between their parts, you can find leverage points that unlock progress, even on a global scale. For more on Geordie Bracken and Mike Goldstein's deep dive into the failings of career centers and potential leverage points for a way forward, check out their white paper, Peeling the College Career Services Office, Onion, for a detailed, day-by-day account of how the University of Iowa Hospital's radiology department fixed patient wait times within a single week. Here is its fascinating case study. For the director's cut version of the methane story, read David W. Brown's New Yorker story, A Security Camera for the Planet. Also, be sure to watch Fred Krupp's inspiring TED Talk announcing the methane SAT project and its vast potential around the 3 o'clock mark. He shows how infrared cameras can detect leaks that are otherwise invisible. There are methodologies for mapping the system that I felt were beyond the scope of this chapter, but I still think they are really valuable. 1. Journey mapping, mentioned briefly, is a good way to map the system for customers, patients, students, etc. For a primer on customer journey mapping, check out Journey Mapping 101. 2. Developing a Theory of Change, this guide by Stanford's Center for Innovation coaches nonprofits through creating a theory of change for their efforts to change the world. It's about as comprehensive as you could hope for, complete with videos, exercises, and advice. 3. Drawing a driver diagram. This is a really helpful visual tool for identifying the elements of